So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this update.
Pause. Sorry, Jamie, I can't share my screen. So can you make me a co-host, please? Okay, now I can. Apologies. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, sorry. It's a little funny too. Once slides are on the screen, you can't see as many people, so it feels a little less like.
And
now we're seeing the slides. Perfect. Okay, I'll start over. So welcome everyone. I'm Bob Woodward, president of IRIS. Welcome to this town hall to update you on the status of the EarthScope Consortium, the progress of the merger of IRIS and UNAVCO. And I'm here today with my fellow presenters, Bex Bendick, the president of UNAVCO, Ronnie Grappenthan, the chair of the UNAVCO Board of Directors, Rick Astor, the chair of the IRIS Board of Directors, and Kevin Kahane, who's from the firm Partners Creative. So you'll be hearing from all of us today. And so what we'd like to do is just give you an update on the status of the merger. And why don't we just go ahead and jump right in? And I'd encourage people also to use the chat function as we go along. If you have questions, that way the people that aren't speaking can be trying to respond to some of those questions, and then of course when we get to the discussion section at the end, we can work our way back through any questions that aren't yet answered, and so on. Typical Zoom protocol. So let me start with information that I hope is well known to all of you, that UNAVCO and IRIS are working to merge together to become the EarthScope Consortium Incorporated. We've been working hard on the planning associated with this, and in particular, working to develop a timeline to complete this merger. And our target timeline right now is to complete the merger by December 2022. So that's just a little over 15 months from now. And I'd like to just kind of point out that this is a merger of UNAVCO and IRIS corporate entities. Of course, UNAVCO and IRIS are each nonprofit corporations that are controlled by university consortia. And so this is a merger of the two corporate entities, and it will not impact the SAGE and GAGE activities. Now, GAGE and SAGE are awards that these two organizations hold from NSF. And let me just drill down a little bit in the next slide on GAGE and SAGE. So, and in particular, let's talk about NSF's plans for SAGE and GAGE. So again, IRIS and UNAVCO, the nonprofit corporations, operate the SAGE and GAGE facilities as awards from NSF. And these two awards are a big part of our respective corporate portfolios, but they're not the only awards that UNAVCO and IRIS hold. We hold additional awards from other organizations besides NSF, and we hold other awards from NSF itself. But SAGE and GAGE are the two biggest awards that we hold. Now, NSF was planning to recompete the SAGE and GAGE facilities during 2021. And they had announced their intention that the follow-on to the SAGE and GAGE facilities would be a single integrated seismogeodetic facility. However, this spring, NSF announced that they would postpone the solicitation for these facilities until for the follow-on to these facilities until 2023. And if you'd like more details about that, you can see the NSF Dear Colleague Letter 21-97. And NSF indicates in that Dear Colleague Letter that they're postponing the solicitation by 2 years to provide time for them to address some of the recommendations in the National Academy Earth and Time Report and NSF's own portfolio review report. And a couple of key recommendations that we'd like to draw your attention to in the portfolio review report include the recommendation that NSF innovate and expand the current scope of the existing GAGE and SAGE facilities, and also that NSF work to enhance partnerships to broaden the base of support for the facilities. So that's what NSF has indicated in their Dear Colleague letter. Now, what does this postponement of the SAGE Engage solicitation mean for geophysics support? So as EarthScope, once IRIS and UNAVCO have completed the implementation of the merger and we're operating as EarthScope, we will continue to manage the SAGE Engage awards through September of 2025, 2 extra years beyond what we were originally awarded. And IRIS and UNAVCO, and then operating together as EarthScope, are pleased and honored to operate SAGE Engage for these 2 additional years, where we're honored that NSF has the confidence in us to extend our awards and let us continue to serve the geophysics community. And IRIS and UNAVCO, we will complete our corporate merger. Again, our target timeline is to complete that corporate merger by December of 2022. So we'll be able to complete that corporate merger before we begin the process of bidding on the SAGE Engage follow-on award, which now is expected for 2023. So that's helpful that we can focus entirely on the merger now and worry about writing a proposal. We can worry about that after the merger is done. So that's a nice thing. So next slide. I'll come back to just giving you a bit of a status about where we are in the overall corporate merger process and the steps in that process. So the first step was negotiation, and that began 2 years ago. And that negotiation process was primarily conducted between the 2 boards of directors, and it concluded with the approval by those 2 boards of the terms of merger and the proposed bylaws for the new organization. So once the boards approved the terms and the bylaws, it was then put to a vote of the membership of IRIS and UNAVCO. That vote was conducted in the fall of 2020, a year ago, and was overwhelmingly approved by both the UNAVCO membership and the IRIS membership. So since that time, we've been engaged in planning, designing the structure and the operations of the merged organization. And we have to plan every detail of EarthScope Consortium, including merging our human resources activities, our financial activities, accounting systems, as well as our programmatic teams that execute the SAGE Engage as well as other award operations. So that's what we've been focused on. Again, the legal implementation will sort of conclude the planning phase. That'll take place in December 2022. And then we'll move on to a phased approach to fully implementing the merger of the 2 organizations and their activities, so there's no disruption in service to the geophysics community. That's absolutely essential, and we're placing a very, very high priority on that. So with that, that kind of wraps up the status of where we're at, and I'll turn it over to Bex to brief the next part.
Thanks so much, Bob. That was perfect. So the planning process, as Bob mentioned, is really complicated and involves a pretty huge hierarchy of detail, some sweeping principles, some detailed analysis. But a key part of the planning process for us was to establish some key attributes and to continue throughout the planning process to work on key principles that help us make decisions in a coherent and consistent framework that we believe represents the core values of our communities and the missions of our organization and the future mission of the EarthScope Consortium. So I just want to share with you what some of these key attributes and principles are, some of which you've seen in previous town halls and communications, others of which are new. So the key attributes of the merger, and many of these are codified in the agreement and plan of merger, is that the merger is a combination of equal entities. So there's no difference in the prioritization of geodesy and seismology in imagining a future for a geophysics facility. The purpose of the merger is to continue to support geophysicists and geophysics research in the same way that IRIS and UNAVCO do now through the SAGE Engage and ancillary awards. But we believe, and I think you as a community have said loud and clear that you also believe, that the merger will enable a new portfolio of activities, especially facilitate collaborative and cross-disciplinary approaches within geophysics and earth system science. And throughout the planning and implementation process, we will continue to emphasize our core values of technical excellence and operational efficiency. And then to help us make some of those tricky planning decisions, we've set out now 6 key principles. The principle of parity, which is what I already alluded to, that there is equality of representation and perspective from all parts of the geophysics community. Of labor, that the steering committee is making choices so that core EarthScope activities will be performed by EarthScope employees and sub awards will be limited. A principle around workplace, that we prefer that the EarthScope consortium will operate with staffing models that allow flexibility and remote work to the extent possible, with the idea that this empowers us to have a much more diverse and distributed and responsive workforce. A principle around location, that the EarthScope consortium will operate with a small number of primary facilities, the location and scope of which is still being planned. A diversification principle that says that the EarthScope consortium will seek to pursue its mission through diverse activities and funding consistent with the guidance of the community governance model. So what this looks like is actually what was alluded to in the NSF portfolio review, that the EarthScope consortium should seek to engage a really wide range of stakeholders who, in some cases might provide funding, but in other cases might help us to shape our mission and our support activities. And then finally, we have a new principle to add to our set of key principles, one built around the notion of justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where the steering committee seeks to create an EarthScope consortium that is inclusive to all kinds of people with all kinds of life experiences and perspectives, and that we will actively work toward achieving greater diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in the new organization and in the geosciences more broadly. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Kevin Kahane, who's representing Partners Creative, which is the design firm that was selected to help us through our branding and identity process. And Kevin, let me know if you have any technical problems and there you go.
All right, can everybody, well, I guess if anybody can't see that, they can ping us. So, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I'm Kevin Cohane from Partners Creative, and we are a brand strategy and marketing communications agency that do a fair amount of work in the nonprofit sector, but also with large commercial organizations. Rebranding is a really big event, particularly when it's a merger. And so it's a really exciting time, I think, for both organizations to take a step back, take stock, and really, take a look in the mirror together and decide who they are and what they want to stand for. A brand is really not a logo. The logo is the manifestation of it. The logo can help identify the brand. The logo can help communicate aspects of the brand, but ultimately the brand is a promise. And so your mission and your vision is really the promise that you're making to your constituents and your marketplace, if you want to call it that. And really what all of you do day in and day out is either going to deliver on that promise or undermine that promise. So it's a really, really exciting time. We're working on what we call the visual identity aspects of your brand. And we're trying to do a lot of things with that. It's a very emotional component, but also think that, your visual identity does have a job to do. Like I said earlier, it's here to help communicate and identify who you are, what you stand for, honor your legacy, but also take you into the future. So the process we've been through up to this point is what we call due diligence, which is really looking at, it's not necessarily a competitive review, but with all the different organizations, across what you do, there's competition certainly for mind share and sort of, understanding of where different organizations sit in the mix. And we did a key stakeholder session. We did a couple actually, an online workshop to really understand the landscape and understand where people's minds were, what you wanted to achieve as a leadership team, and what the new brand identity needs to do for you. And that was a really key input. And one thing I'll say about that session is doing those sessions with leadership teams from merging organizations, you have no idea what's going to happen. There can be a lot of hidden tension. There can be a lot of confusion. There can be lack of alignment. And what we found in that session was both of the leadership teams from both organizations, the staff members, you actually share a lot more in common than differences. And that's really, really a great outcome to get to. And then to buttress that session, we conducted a survey that nearly 200 people completed, which is a really good result. It's not statistically significant, but it's definitely an input that we want to take into account. And what I will say is the results of the survey were certainly not at odds with the shared view of the leadership teams. So that's actually good as well, meaning that the people who are kind of making the decisions are not miles away from the people who are going to be impacted by and influence those decisions. So that's really good. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights from that survey, and we'll talk about the next steps. And the next steps are really where we start looking at creative concepts and a set of visual identity elements. So as I said earlier, these are going to be the manifestation of the brand itself. So it's going to be things like the logo, what the name is, what the color palette is, how we talk about the brand, how we use the brand identity in different applications. So in terms of who answered the survey, a lot of the majority of responses came from people who are actually users of the two data sets or services of the organizations. A good cross-section of staff, and a smaller proportion, but a good proportion of education and outreach users here. So it's a pretty good cross-section of your population overall. And first of all, we did ask the question about, like, as I said earlier, a brand can do a lot of things. It can help, drive stakeholder engagement. It can help generate value. It can help drive funding sources. It can signal the change that's going on here. And, we kind of cut down to the three top responses across the board, which are really the majority of people want this new visual identity, this new brand to really express the vision, the mission, the work that you are all doing as a merged organization with consistency and clarity. And that certainly aligns with your leadership team. Another 20% listed as their second choice, broaden awareness among new audiences and communities. So really raising awareness, not just among your existing constituencies, but new people, new communities who, might be able to either use or contribute to what you do. And then a percentage came out listing the third most important thing that the brand needs to do is increasing the diversity of funding resources. And that really comes as a byproduct of really those first 2 points. Interesting aside here is that even though it was a small number of respondents, your education and outreach respondents indicated a higher proportion of people who wanted to emphasize that the brand should help generate more value for consortium members. Which again is not a surprising sort of perspective to take. So in terms of the name, we presented a number of different options. Are we just going to use the name EarthScope? Do we want the word consortium in there equally? Do we want EarthScope to be dominant, but maybe consortium, is sort of like an endorsement or a subset there? Do we want to use an acronym like ESC or ESCO or something else? And by and large, a pretty high proportion of people really preferred the idea of just the name EarthScope, with a pretty, pretty significant number of people saying, yes, it should be EarthScope, but we should be able to have some flexibility in terms of how we express it, in terms of having the logo lockup, which I'll talk about in just a second here. And this could have gone any direction. We could very easily have had a lot of people say, oh, we really want an acronym. Maybe thankfully that's not the direction that things went in. Interestingly, the UNAVCO outreach members liked the idea of having including consortium there. And IRIS staff, the response we had there also really strongly supported EarthScope. So again, it's not necessarily statistically significant differences there, but just a couple little variations. In terms of the actual logo itself, there are really three broad categories of what a logo can do. It can be just a word mark, which is typographic, something like eBay or Progressive or Vans in this example. On the other extreme, it can be just a logo mark, which is just a symbol, like you see the Pepsi icon, the Target icon, the Nike swoosh. And those are often used with or without the actual name of the organization or the entity. And really a pretty strong preference is expressed, and this aligns with your leadership decisions, that a lockup, that it's both the symbol that may be able to be used on its own, but usually will be seen with the name of the organization. So a kind of lockup approach was the preferred direction. In terms of the color palette, clearly color is really subjective. There's some research that shows, that different colors do tend to represent, depending on your culture, different kinds of emotions. Red tends to be more about passion and excitement. Black can represent anything from elegance to death, depending how you look at it. But broadly, among the options of sort of sticking to where your sector is or moving to a new and bold color palette, and we use the word blue here, although it's more of a sort of purpley bluish teal world that the scientific community tends to live in. By and large, you wanted to stay true to your heritage, but start to move towards a slightly more earthy new color arrangement. So again, the blue box here shows you, honoring your roots, honoring your sector and your heritage, but kind of, wandering a little bit more into your own space, using your secondary palette, which would be colors that, perhaps like, blue or green, which are a bit more earthy. So the third element is typography. And typography tends to fall into two broad categories. The first one being the kind of serif typography, and that kind of really refers to those little embellishments you see at the ends and the tips of the characters here, and that tends to be used to demonstrate trustworthiness, a little more academic, a little more traditional and trustworthy or established. But again, that's not necessarily 100% true, because Sony's very cutting edge in terms of gaming and music and entertainment and technology, but they deliberately use a quite serif font to tell the story that, yeah, we might be cutting edge, but we're a very established company. Sans serif typography doesn't have the little serifs on the end. It tends to be seen as more contemporary, more legible, cleaner, modern, that sort of thing. So, like the FedEx logo, the BBC logo. And often you'll see these work in partnership. So often an organization might use a serif typography with sans serif copy, or vice versa, or a blend of the two. And that's sort of where we landed with you, that the majority of people like the idea of the clean, modern sans serif, which certainly fits with the category that you work in. But with the opportunity to use sans serif for longer form applications. So those are kind of the three key elements. What is the kind of composition of the logo graphically? What's the color palette that it's going to represent and kind of use? And how is typography going to work alongside that logo as you move forward? And one note I will make here, and you'll see a comment on the next page I'm about to make, is that, part of this exercise is us making sure that we're representing and thinking about the inputs from your leadership team and from your community. But part of it is also using our professional expertise and our professional judgment on how to move forward. I don't think we're going to drift far from the inputs that we've received. But if we do drift, there will be a reason for it. And that'll generally be one of three things. One, that we don't feel it's authentically representing the new merged organization. Two would be, we think it's not really being compelling and relevant to your audience. And the third would be, is it being distinctive enough so that you'll stand apart from your immediate peers in such a way that's important. So finally, really gratifying that more than 80% of the respondents included some open-ended commentary at the end of the survey, which is really unusual. Oftentimes people get to the end of the survey and just that's it, they're done. But over 80% of people actually put comments in. So we had to cherry pick a little, but I'm not going to read all of these things here, but we tried to pick a good representative cross-section of some of the sentiments we saw. Of course, we would love the one on the top left, which is give the design professionals' opinions more weight than scientists, which we had a nice chuckle over, but also, it's a good sanity check there as well. I also think, that's mirrored on the bottom right here, is that, you do want to engage people, you do want to get points of view and perspectives, but, often, brands don't do very well when they're designed by committee. So, we're trying to thread the needle here and make sure that we're taking input, but also using our best judgment. And then other comments here were really insightful and inspiring in terms of some of the nuances that we need to take into account. The purple branding of Iris, but it not necessarily working well with reds. Making sure that the language we use is reflective of what's truly a global organization, where English might not be a first language. Really remembering that, Earth scope fits in the world of the microscope to the telescope, and we're turning that on the Earth. So a lot of really interesting thoughts here, and we're going to be sharing the full survey results with the leadership team, and they may choose to share that more broadly or not. So it's been a fun exercise and a lot of input. As I said, oftentimes we go into these exercises and there's not a lot of alignment, so we have to kind of make some tough decisions. Here it feels like we've got really good alignment amongst all of your different leaders and your constituents. So where we're going to head next is we're going to start exploring some broad creative concept alternatives. And what that really means is not even necessarily going straight into logo design, but going into reflecting some broad creative ideas and some concepts that will try to push the boundaries as to how far we want to take your visual identity system, both visually and verbally. Once we have a concept, we'll then start developing different logo options. And we usually use more than one designer for this. So what we do is we'll give the brief to 2, maybe 3 different designers and set them off on their own path, not communicating with each other, because that's when we get some really interesting results and some really different points of view. And then those designers can come together and kick around ideas and develop ideas that are then shared with your leadership groups. And then a final logo and identity guidelines will be delivered. So, it'll be how to use the new identity system, how the typography should work, how the logo can be used and how it can't be used, and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure if we had expected to do or wanted to do a Q&A or hold that for offline, but again, it's been a lot of fun, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I think what we are going to do is I'm going to show a couple more slides with a few more merger things, and then we should have plenty of time for Q&A, discussion, feedback. So if you're able to stay on, please do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'll get back to this. Is it right way around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Rick, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Bex, and thanks, Kevin. A few comments here on upcoming board elections. We will be electing new members of both the IRIS and UNAVCO boards for a 2022 term. We'll be conducting those elections this fall. There are 2 slots open on the IRIS board and 3 on the UNAVCO board. So please watch your emails for details, particularly the member representatives who will be voting in this upcoming election. And note that these elections have some special characteristics that reflect the merger timeline that Bob Woodward discussed a moment ago. The nominating committees, respectively, of the 2 consortia are considering candidates that would have crossover knowledge and experience across both IRIS and UNAVCO for each of the boards. And this will set the stage for the first EarthScope Consortium board, which we'll discuss on the next slide. And one other comment I have on this is if you are an IRIS or UNAVCO representative and you're anticipating a transition at your institution that would affect who's voting in this upcoming election this fall, please let either Bex or Bob know about that change in membership at your institution so we can keep that clean. So next slide, please. So future board elections, per our bylaws, we will be holding an election next year in this time period, where we will have 4 members elected from the geodesy community writ large, 4 members elected from the seismology community writ large, and then the IRIS and UNAVCO 2022 boards will each appoint 2 members to fully constitute the 12-person EarthScope Consortium board next year, and have that board ready to stand up and govern the organization in December at the time of merger. So in this election next year, each member institution will have a single ESCO member representative. So once the election cycle is complete for the IRIS and UNAVCO boards this fall, we ask that you each please have a discussion amongst your institutions, and by this year, next time or before, please decide on who the single EarthScope Consortium board representative will be for your institution. So I will now pass it over to my colleague, Ronnie Rappentine.
Frank, and thanks everybody else. This was really, really great stuff. The closing comments that I have here are, again, that the communication throughout this whole process is critical. What we're doing is we are in the unique and exciting position to make a new consortium that is, Cliff can't hear. Can you hear, Bex? Yeah.
Can hear.
So we are making a new consortium that is designed for our community, and so you need to let us know on the steering committee and on all of the various governance committees whether or not things are going the right direction. And unfortunately, we're doing this really exciting thing during a time when communication doesn't work like it used to. And it looks like it will not again in this fall either. So while I was super excited to go back to in-person meetings this fall, you know, more and more these are being canceled again, and we've just got to make it through another however long time to deal with the new or suboptimal communications that we've had. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you if we can do so informally in the coffee line that Bob has mentioned in the beginning. We have these town halls. There will be more in the future, but you know, get in touch with us directly on the steering committee with your governance representatives, your member reps, and a few things that you can get involved with right now is obviously the branding, and I was super excited to see that so many of you have participated in that survey. I found the exercise that we went through with Partners Creative really great. As Bex had said at the end of the meeting, it was the best meeting of the week. It was just totally different and really fun. So please stay engaged so we can make sure that we are staying aligned as the survey has shown. In December, we'll have a membership meeting that will be joint between UNAVCO and IRIS. We're hammering out the details for this right now. And then, as Rick just said, start having discussions locally if you are having different IRIS and UNAVCO member reps to figure out how the future ESCO member representative should be selected amongst yourselves, so that for when EarthScope legally is established, we have our membership sorted out. And I think we can go to the next slide now, Bex. So this kind of summarizes what I said at the beginning. We're planning. There's a lot of planning that's happening. That's really kind of guts of a consortium, financial systems, etc. That's maybe not all that exciting, but overall we're driven to make sure that we design a facility that supports the geophysics community to do their best science possible. And again, you, our community, point the way in how this should be set up, and so we need to hear from you. And the other part of that is the incredibly passionate and committed staff of UNAVCO and IRIS that have been building these world-class facilities, and now should also be a significant part in how we're designing the new merged facility in the future. Next slide. And there are a couple of ways in which you can maybe more passively follow if you just want to stay up to date. One is the website, the Joining Forces website, which is being updated quite frequently now. And the other thing that just went out earlier this week is the new merger newsletter that has been established, which will come out regularly in kind of a 6 to 8 week or so frequency to give, again, updates on kind of the key items that are of interest to our community that we're doing in terms of merging, and how IRIS and UNAVCO are already working together. So again, stay engaged, even if it's hard. We really want to hear from you, and thanks for showing up today. It's exciting to see 193 people attend this town hall, and I hand it back to Bex to start out the Q&A.
Thank you so much, all presenters, and we have a good solid 20 minutes to hear any and all of your questions, thoughts, ideas. What are we forgetting to do? What's working well? I think go ahead and raise your hand, and maybe the presenter team will call on people, unless it gets wildly unruly, and then maybe we'll ask you to use the chat window, but let's see how it goes. All right, not wildly unruly. Angie.
Hi, thanks. Very boring question. I apologize for having been multitasking. Could you go over again you mentioned letting you know sooner rather than later, I think, about any change in the voting person for some reason having to do with the merger?
So, the idea or the way that the merger implementation works is that all member institutions of either UNAVCO or IRIS will automatically become members of the EarthScope consortium, but each member institution has just one vote in the new consortium. And so there are many institutions that currently now have a UNAVCO member rep and an IRIS member rep. We are asking that those institutions find a way themselves to decide who the member rep will be going forward. So we're hoping, we're really encouraging people to have that conversation sooner than later, so that when the time comes to elect the new Earthscope Consortium board, that is already resolved. But
Okay.
we're not like dictating. I mean, if you come to blows, let us know and we'll flip a coin for you. But we're not dictating a specific process by which member institutions will choose their representatives going forward.
Okay, very clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Daniel.
My question following that is when do you want that decision to be made? Is it in the fall of next year?
Yes, in the fall of next year. So this year you'll be electing an ordinary UNAVCO board, well, a more or less ordinary UNAVCO board and IRIS board, but the fall/winter 2022 election will be for the Earthscope Consortium board, and that is the time at which each member institution has to have one vote figured out.
Thank you.
If you want to do it sooner, that's absolutely fine. Whatever time frame works best for your institution.
Sure, but don't give up one of your votes for this fall's election, because we do want 2 boards to be voted for. Megan.
Hi. Yeah, I guess this is a question for everyone, but I remember Bob Woodward's initial slide. One of the comments that came up in the NSF EAR review was calling for innovation and more interaction. And I'm wondering, and broadening the scope of the new unified geophysical facility. So I was wondering if you could comment if you have any initial ideas about that in terms of broadening the scope. Does that mean incorporating more kinds of instruments other than the 2 major kinds that you have already? And also broadening the scope and interaction, would the new consortia consider bringing on any new partners to help with innovation? And have you thought about that at all yet?
I guess probably all of us could comment on that. And certainly this is also a great place to hear from the community as well. Just say that right up front. You know, the 2 reports that are referenced by NSF, the Earth and Time report, really speaks to very broad science questions and the need to address this wide range of questions. The Instrumentation Portfolio Review Committee was specifically focused on SAGE Engage, but also made a number of recommendations around innovations in technology and newer technologies. And there's even a kind of a nice graphic at the beginning of the report that kind of illustrates some of the new technologies that they're recommending be pursued. And so I think that of course, some of this is up to NSF and what direction they want to head in interpreting these reports and focusing on that. But I would say, to my mind, new instrumentation would clearly be part of that. I think the other big element, though, is partnerships potentially with other federal agencies that might share in supporting the facilities that NSF currently supports, to a large degree supports alone. But I'll stop there and see if any of Bex or Rick or Ronnie want to add to that.
I would just say, like, that is the funnest, best, most exciting guidance ever, right? That's for us and you all to dream. I mean, that gives us license to dream big and think about how we can look to a future where people are really doing cutting edge research in Earth systems instead of disciplinary domains. And how do we carry on our legacy of supporting the most exciting science out there? So does it mean new instrumentation? Sure. Does it mean new cyber infrastructure, new platforms, new communities that we're reaching out to, and new partners, either for funding or for shaping our vision? And like, yes, all of that. Absolutely. So fun.
Yeah, well put, Bex. I just add that this occurs at all time scales. So there's, existing activities of the boards and the connecting activities already between IRIS and UNAVCO. They're going on right now. There's the next 2 years of SAGE Engage under EarthScope. And then there's, what comes beyond that. We're anticipating another 2025-ish follow on to EarthScope and SAGE Engage extension that, we should all be looking forward to as well as a community.
Great. I just had one follow-up idea. One of the things I've heard a lot in the Zoom rooms this last year is a bit of frustration from colleagues that combine using OBS instruments with land instruments and doing field campaigns that involve both. And so I was wondering if there was any consideration of that the OBS pool might become part of this new unified geophysical facility. And I know there are a lot of entanglements at NSF with funding coming from ocean sciences and earth sciences. And maybe that's a lot more complicated to get into than now, but I can see that as something that would really simplify things for the PIs to have some kind of more streamlined process there. And I see John Arkett's here, and I'm wondering if he might have some comments about naval funding for that kind of thing too.
I think short answer is yes, we should explore that as one of many options. And I'll maybe call on John in a second, but I know Gabby Lasky has had her hand up for a while and there's a question in the chat. So maybe we can circle back.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to go back to Megan's original question and address the NSF DCL. The original, I guess, motivation for the merger was to be more cost effective to NSF. Could you clarify that the updated DCL and the response to the DCL actually means that NSF now encourages to think bigger and they are willing to invest more than SAGE Gauge, the combined SAGE Gauge was in the past?
I think first part, yes, encourages us to think bigger. Committed to investing in that, I mean, who knows? That depends on so many things that have to do with things like federal appropriations and stuff. But I would say us as a community, our job is to paint such a compelling vision of what cool stuff we can do, dreaming big, that there's no question that it should be invested in, right?
Sense
Yep.
To add on to that, we now have a really good chance with the delay of that solicitation by 2 years to merge and build that new facility and show that these things are A, needed by the community, and B, that this facility can do these things, and set us up for just demonstrating all of the things that we might want, and hopefully thus having an impact on how a future solicitation might look for a community facility.
And then maybe if I could just add on as well, that I think as a part of the earth science community, we are it's a great thing to see two reports that are so supportive, right? The Earth in Time report, it takes a look at the major science questions and encourages NSF to think big and invest in addressing those questions. And then the instrumentation portfolio review, much more focused on SAGE Engage, but also extremely positive, noting the value of these facilities, encouraging, even sketching out growth strategies for the facilities. And so that's incredibly exciting. I think one of the things, though, that I take away from what I've heard NSF say and what's in the Earth in Time report is that NSF is really looking to move forward on a number of earth science fronts. And so I think as we think big, we should think about opportunities to entrain other parts of the earth sciences with us and to share in, in these broader visions. And that will be well received at NSF. Kind of broadening out beyond kind of the core geophysics community that IRIS and UNAVCO have historically served.
Yeah, and to close out those comments, I'd emphasize that the 2-year extension of SAGE Engage is really a gift. It's a gift for our communities to integrate, to realize broader geophysical scientific goals, to grow as a community, and to position ourselves, I think, very effectively for the future of geophysical facilities at NSF.
All right, I don't see any lurking hands, so I don't know if John or Git, you want to say something about what role you see for ocean bottom sensors in this vision, or we could defer that to a later discussion.
I could just comment on a couple of things. You mentioned the Navy and the ONR, and an awful lot of the modern development of instrumentation in the oceans has been supported by the Office of Naval Research and not so much by the National Science Foundation. But equipment has changed a lot over the last few years and will continue to improve as time goes by. We'll just keep watching.
So I'd especially like to urge any of you out there in Zoom world who are early career or students or just getting going to either, chime in now with your perspective or reach out to the steering committee, because we are building this organization for you, for your future career. And frankly, you all are doing the most exciting cutting edge stuff. So we want to make sure what we build is responsive, not only to, the esteemed established scientists of the moment, but also the future of our field. So don't be shy. All right, then we're going to hunt you down and ask you face to face. All right, so many of you, if not all of you, know how to find Bob and Rick and Ronnie and I. If you have any last questions for Partners Creative, this might be a great moment to ask those. And there was one more question in the chat about balancing governance, and Bob Woodward answered it in the chat. So.
And I might just add to that if people would like to read the EarthScope bylaws, I know they're pretty dry, but there's the copy of the bylaws on the Joining Forces website. And there's also a sort of a plain English version of the bylaws, which you might find a little more enjoyable if you do want to read them.
And the merger principles are on that page as well.
Yep.
Okay, Lara, I see a hand.
Oh, go ahead.
Let's see, can you hear me? So I guess the one question I had for the branding, is there any concern about, EarthScope is a name we've had before. It meant something very different for the last decade to our community. Is there any sort of a plan or strategy on how to make sure that when we do our future branding, that there's no confusion when people say EarthScope, that they don't think, oh, that giant, deployment of seismometers across the US together with PBO and everything else that came with that? Is that something that's been discussed as to a way to rebrand that term into meaning what it will now mean?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and then Bex and Bob can supplement as need be. We definitely are aware of that. And, the real key there is just to make sure that we're really transparent and communicate that fact that, EarthScope, the heritage of the name came from the success of that project, and make it clear on, where possible on that project that this is the case. And when we're doing the new branding, that this is the case. It's always a challenge migrating a brand like that. But it also adds a bit of brand equity and recognition, which we think is pretty beneficial.
Yeah,
hope-
I would say we felt comfortable going with that name because we, in some ways, Iris and UNAVCO already kind of own the intellectual property behind the original Earthscope. I mean, we own the domain and we own the brand property as it is, but we also were like intimately involved. And that's a nice example of what awesome things come when geodesists and seismologists work together. So it wasn't a decision taken like in an absence of understanding what the original Earthscope was.
Well, right, but Iris and UNAVCO do so much more than just Earthscope. So I was just hoping that there would be some sort of a plan to make sure that whatever we do will convey that it's not just Earthscope.
Yeah. And as I'll join in there and say, yeah, I'm really keen to see how Kevin and the team handle that, because that is exactly kind of the challenge we articulated to them, is to build on, the success and the history of Earthscope and this great partnership of Iris and UNAVCO, but yet move into the future where now Earthscope means something different. So, kind of how to get the best of both, right? To kind of inherit that mantle of success that we achieved under the Earthscope program, but move forward as the Earthscope Consortium. And I'm not sure how they will do that, but that is a challenge we pose to them.
So maybe we have time for one last question. I saw Suzanne had her virtual hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. And meanwhile, my question is posted in the chat as well.
Oh.
There is an initiative called Earthscope Oceans. And so what is, how is confusion avoided with that? Or is there a merger planned with Earthscope Oceans? And yes, what's the plan?
There's no merger planned with Earthscope Oceans. So that was they did request years ago to use the Earthscope as part of the name. Let me back up. The project team that is operating Earthscope Oceans, I think they were originally operating under a different name, and then they requested some years ago to use the Earthscope as part of their name, and that was granted, but they're completely distinct and there's no plans for any merger there.
But I mean, potential for confusion with an ongoing project might be larger than with a past and completed project by the same entity that is called Earthscope now. So is there a plan for avoiding confusion, or is that in the works with Kevin?
So I'll just say that we were presented with Earthscope as a fait accompli. So there's some legacy considerations we absolutely have to account for. It is a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not, but to me the key is just to be really clear when we communicate, what the history is, versus, and why that name was selected, and then where we're going together into the future.
All right. Dead on time, as befits geophysicists. But thank you everyone for coming, and please keep track of what we're doing. Let us know how it's going, and we love working for and with all of y'all.
Thanks everyone.
everyone.
It's great.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you very